Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you very much indeed for coming to the BCS Roger Needham lecture, sponsored by Microsoft Research of Cambridge. I have my own personal memories of Roger Needham as the key trustee in a little organisation called the Foundation for Information Policy Research, where he and I were both trustees. And they're very warm memories of a remarkable man. So it's always a personal pleasure to be involved with this particular lecture in Roger's memory. Tonight's lecture is being filmed and will be available on our website shortly. So before we begin, can I ask you please to make sure that mobile phones and laptops are switched off, not just to silent, but switched off, so they don't interfere in particular with the audio side of the recording that we're making tonight. I'm sure you've all heard, and I certainly have, the wonderful ratcheting noise of GSM, which does tend to mess up recordings. So now down to this evening's business. The Roger Needham Award is part of BCS's remit to encourage and to recognise personal endeavour in computer science. The award, as I've said, sponsored by Microsoft Research of Cambridge, was established in the memory of Microsoft's first Director of Research outside the US, Roger Needham. Each year, it's awarded for a distinguished research contribution in computer science by a UK-based researcher within 10 years of their PhD. The recipients receive a cash prize together with an opportunity to give a public lecture on their work here in the wonderful and historic surroundings of the Royal Society. We also take this opportunity to present the BCS CPHC, Council Professor of Higher Education and Computing, Distinguished Dissertations runner-up and winner. To do this, I would like to invite Anne Blandford of the University College London and chair, not entirely a thankless task, but of the dissertation selection panel to the stage. Anne.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, everybody. So this is the pleasurable kind of culmination of a year of hard work, not just by me, I assure you, but by a lot of reviewers who've read all the dissertations. That we had 23 submissions this year, and they were all read by at least 4 reviewers. So we had a lot of really good information on which to base our decision, but it was nevertheless a very, very hard decision to make. The aim of the Distinguished Dissertations Prize is to make more visible the best of UK doctoral research. And I have to say, as chair, it's been a real pleasure to read a lot of the reviewers' reports, which emphasise quite how outstanding so much of the doctoral research that goes on in this country is. Most of the 23 dissertations that we received this year received very, very high praise from their reviewers. We asked them to assess them not just for academic quality, but also for a high standard of exposition, i.e. being readable, placing their results clearly in the context of computer science as a whole and not just of the very narrow subfield in which the work was conducted, and enabling a computer scientist with very different interests to actually appreciate and understand the work. This year, our runner-up was Vera Denberg-Winterfors, who unfortunately can't be with us today because she's based in Germany now and has a very, very young family, so travelling was a bit impractical for her. She did her degree at Edinburgh, and her title was A Broad Coverage Model of Prediction in Human Sentence Processing. And I'd like to quote from one of the referees from her thesis, who said that the coverage, innovativeness and thoroughness of this thesis work are unprecedented. I wish somebody had said that kind of thing about my PhD, but you can't win them all. So now I would like to present the prize for the winner to Daniel Greenfield, who's hiding behind the screen from me here. I really need to grow as well. Daniel completed his PhD at Cambridge, and his title was Rentian Locality in Chip Microprocessors. And again, a quotation from one of his referees. The thesis has a vast scope and is well written and is very thorough in the design of experiments and the reporting of results. Each chapter contains several insights and taken as a whole represents a major accomplishment. And it's that accomplishment that we're celebrating here this evening, before, of course, we move on to celebrating Maya's accomplishment. So, Daniel, oh, I have a prize.
And I'd like to add my own congratulations both to Vera in absentia and also to Daniel. I'd now like to invite Professor Andrew Blake, Distinguished Scientist and Managing Director of Microsoft Research Cambridge, to join me on the stage and say a few words on behalf of Microsoft Research as we move to the presentation of the Roger Needham Award 2011.
Well, we're here to celebrate the winner of the Roger Needham Award for 2011, Professor Maya Pontic. She joined Imperial College London Department of Computing in 2006, and last year she became Professor of Affective and Behavioural Computing and is the leader of the Intelligent Behaviour Understanding Group. She has received numerous honours and awards already. For example, she received the Dutch Research Council Junior Fellowship, which is awarded every year to the 7 best young researchers of exact sciences in the Netherlands. And in 2007, her research on machine analysis of human naturalistic behaviour was awarded a major European Research Council grant for 5 years. And those grants are just awarded to the 2%, the 2% best junior scientists in any research field throughout Europe. She's now the editor-in-chief of the Image and Vision Computing Journal, and she's on the editorial boards of several leading journals. She's published more than 100 papers in the area of machine analysis of facial expressions and emotions, and the machine analysis of human body gestures and human-centered HCI. Her work is deservedly highly cited. So Professor Pontic is a very deserving winner of this year's BCS Needham Award. She's an outstanding researcher who's contributed substantially to the advancement of computational approaches to the understanding of human behaviour. Her pioneering work on what has become known throughout the world as affective computing is helping to lay the foundations for a kind of computer that is far more responsive to the humans that use them. So on behalf of Microsoft Research, I would like to offer Professor Pontic the heartiest of congratulations on being selected by the BCS for the prestigious Roger Needham Award, and just to say how very much we look forward to her lecture tonight. And I think we have... And we have also one or two things to present to her. First of all, there's the cheque. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the plaque.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well done. And now you just have to present the lecture.
Okay. What to say? It's first of all, let's see if I can talk. It's a great honor to be here, and this is just a fantastic event. So I was thinking for a long time, what should I present for this presentation? And I was thinking, okay, probably the best is to explain to you how does it come that I'm here after 15 years of starting my studies in the Delft University of Technology. So indeed, everything started in Delft some 15 years ago with the choice of my final project for my Master of Science degree. I had 2 choices. One was to build an object-oriented database for nuclear reactor in Petten in the Netherlands. And the other one was to work on facial expressions in static images. So of course, given that I was fascinated by psychology and human behavior for a very long time, and even more so by the human face, the choice was actually rather easy. In fact, this fascination with human face comes from the functionalities that the human face has. So the face is, first of all, our primary means for identifying other members of the species, so other people. It is also one of the main informations we use when we want to judge somebody's age, or the gender, or the attractiveness. And even we use the face to judge somebody's personality. Whether that is a correct way of judging the personality, that's a separate issue. Most importantly, the face is our preeminent means of, first of all, expressing, but also understanding other people's emotions, attitudes, and intentions. Hence, as I said, the choice of my final project for my Master of Science degree was rather easy, and so I embarked on a journey of research on automated facial expression analysis, which I still happily enjoy. So the first thing what we did was actually to try to analyze prototypic facial expressions of emotions in static face images. What we used were very standard, very simple image processing and computer vision techniques, such as image intensity histogramming and active contours. And the main idea was to actually decide the boundary of the different facial components, such as the mouth and the eyes, and then based on the boundary found in the current examined image, compared to the relevant boundary found in an expressionless face of the same person, we would reason about prototypic facial expression. These rules that we use, because we use the simple rule-based system, were actually the same rules that the psychologists have been using for defining these prototypic facial expressions. So, for example, the squinted eyes and the tightened lips would be actually the prototypic expression of anger. The very first lesson that I learned was that if your goal is to analyze spontaneous facial behavior observed in naturalistic environments, then the 6 basic emotions and these very limited set of interpretation categories may not be sufficient. So think about this boy. What does he show? Is that sadness? Or is it surprise? Is it really happiness? So that's how we moved towards so-called facial action units. Facial action units have been introduced by 2 psychologists, Paul Ekman and Willy Friesen, in 1978, and they are actually directly linked to the facial muscle actions. So what you have is a set of these action units, such as, for example, so think about it, each action unit is directly linked to contraction of a single muscle or a group of muscles that move together. So, for example, action unit 1 is related to the contraction of the forehead muscle. However, it only contracts the middle portion of that muscle. On the other side, action unit 2 is related to the contraction of the outer portion of the same muscle and causes the wrinkles above the outer part of the eyebrows. Action unit 4 will be the contraction of the muscles running around the eyebrows and causes the wrinkles in between the eyes. And so you have 45 such action units. Given that we can display some 10,000 different facial expressions, 7,000 of which we display on a daily basis, and that these 45 action units in combination with each other and in various intensities actually account for those 10,000 expressions, then it is absolutely clear how huge the dimensionality reduction is if you go from the interpretation categories like emotions to something like action units. So action units are agnostic. They are independent of the higher level interpretation. You can use them to interpret, to code actually the displays of so-called basic emotions such as anger or sadness or happiness. You can also use them to code the facial expressions of non-prototypic emotions such as contempt or an attitude, or in fact, any given facial expression. So the first thing what we did was to look into the static images of facial expressions and try to code action units from those. Very soon we realized that action units, if you have just a static view of a person, there is no motion, there is no other view, just one image, you can actually misinterpret certain expressions because different action units may cause changes that are very similar to each other, yet they are different. So first we thought, okay, let's introduce another view which will disambiguate between such similar action units. Or actually, they're not similar action units, they just cause similar changes in the facial expression. So we first started with the automatic analysis of dual views composed of frontal view and the profile view, recorded by using a mirror placed on 90 degrees to the face of the observed subject. So we used very similar techniques as we have been using for the analysis of prototypic facial expressions, so very similar image intensity histogramming, the same active contours. However, at this point, we were interested in the contours of the facial components, such as the mouth and the eyes in the frontal view, and the contour of the profile. And we extracted a number of facial points from those contours and then defined the rules that would say something about the action units. Those points were actually facial characteristic points because they were very prominent, like, for example, corners of the eyes, the top of the eye, the bottom of the eye, corners of the mouth, and so on. The rules that we used for action unit recognition were actually defined in terms of the displacement of those points when compared to the observed image with an expressionless face image of the same subject. So the action unit 7, which is the squint, was defined as the reduction in the distance between the top and the bottom of the eye opening. Although this method has its advantages, first of all, it could recognize 32 out of 45 different action units, and it has been used worldwide by different groups as a baseline method to which they compared their own methods. This method could not actually code all action units, and hence could not code all different facial expressions that we can observe. And especially one of those expressions is exasperation, which is very typical for both human-computer interaction and human-human interaction. Those are the two applications that we are very much interested in. So another important thing was that this method did not take at all into account the facial motion. Okay, it worked only with static images. Let me explain why facial motion is important. Look at those two images. So the left-hand side image is an expressionless face. The right-hand side image is an expressive face. What would you say is the meaning of this expression? Give me a guess. Surprise. Okay, this is a very good guess. Why? Surprise is a prototypic facial expression, and this expression contains actually almost all characteristics of prototypic facial expression of surprise. So the eyebrows are raised, the eye openings seem to be more open, the eyes seem to be more open, and the mouth is more open, okay? However, if you look at the motion, very soon you realize that this has nothing to do with surprise. This is a typical way for Greeks to say no, or to South Americans to greet each other. So, hence, we thought, okay, facial motion is really important, and this is how we started the research on the automatic analysis of facial expressions in face videos. Typical steps of such a method are to first recognize detect the face in the input image sequence and then track the face for the rest of the sequence, then to detect and track a number of features, and then based on the changes in those features to reason about the facial expression. So we worked on each and every of these steps for the past 10 years. We worked quite a lot on face and facial point tracking. First, what we worked on was a particle filtering framework where the whole idea was actually to track constellations of points. So each of the components was facial components, like an eye or an eyebrow or the mouth, was represented as the constellation of facial points. And then we tracked those constellations together. And we actually put some constraints so that these points could not move wherever, but have to move in a way that we have observed already in the training data. In that way, we, for example, said it's impossible that the mouth corner comes on the other side of the face. Okay? This tracker worked actually pretty well in different instances, including the instances of spontaneous facial expressions. However, it did not work extremely well when we had sudden and large head movements. So we tried different things, and very recently we proposed a new method for face tracking, which partially addresses these problems. This recent tracker is actually based on the incremental, robust kernel principal component analysis, which on an incremental basis updates the principal component space, which has been built based on the orientations of image gradients. Okay? We have shown that the method works very, very well in case of short-lived occlusions, also in case of drastic changes in illumination. This is actually one of the first trackers that can deal with these really large changes in illumination. However, observe all of these people. They move quite smoothly and they move slowly. This is not very typical for natural human behavior observed in naturalistic environments. So although the tracker can work very well even with image sequences where you have very low frame rate, as is the case with the video of the boy, it cannot work very well if the head motions are very large, various, and very sudden. So we are still working on this problem, and we hope to address this very soon. We also developed a number of other methods, such as active appearance models, that could deal with this, and I will show you a little bit later how that works. When it comes to facial expression classification, we first worked on, classifying input facial expressions in terms of action units on a frame-by-frame basis. So we would track the points in an input face video, and then the displacements of those points were classified on a frame-by-frame basis into the action units. The problem with that is that when you do things on a frame-by-frame basis, what do you get is that on one frame you may get that an action unit is activated while it is not activated on the next, and again being activated on the next one, which is absolutely anthropomorphically impossible because facial muscles need time to get activated, okay? So in principle, what we wanted to achieve is to have a temporal model so that we know that the facial muscle and action unit that we code should get activated, then stay activated for even a short period of time, and then get disactivated. These temporal segments are called onset, apex, and offset of action units or an action. So in this case, what is happening is that due to tracking, you would have a wrongly identified action unit 27 in this case, which is the jaw drop, just because you have an artifact of the tracking, right? However, if you impose this temporal model and you say, well, I must have an action unit first activated in onset, then in apex, even if that is a short one, and then in offset, this thing will simply be temporally smoothed, and you will not score the action unit 27. More importantly, the encoding of temporal evolution of action units, so encoding the temporal segments of actions, is extremely important for understanding subtle and complex behavior. Let me show you this on an example. Here we have two young ladies. One of them is entertained by a clown. The other one is told to laugh, and she did. My question to you is, which one is entertained by a clown and laughs spontaneously? Who says that that is this young lady? All right. All right. Who says is this one? Okay, here we come. This is a very typical, so you are wrong. So this is a very typical result of vote which I take from people that have a highly technical background. If I am in an environment like psychologists and I give this talk, most of the people will say this girl laughs spontaneously, which is a correct answer. However, when you have people with technical background, one way or the other, they always say that's this girl. Let me explain to you why is the left-hand side girl the one who laughs spontaneously. Look at the movement of her mouth corners. First, she thinks, okay, is this funny? Oh, yes, it's funny. Let me smile a little bit more. While the other girl was sad, laugh, and she laughs. Laugh, 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 laugh. Okay, now it's enough. Close down. Okay. So this kind of very fast onset and very fast offset are typical for acted behaviors, while the multiple apexes are very typical of spontaneous behavior. Okay, so if I would not be able to automatically code the onset, apex, and offset of my action unit, I will not be able to understand which girl laughs spontaneously and which acts her laugh. So I would not be able to distinguish between polite smiles and joyful smiles, or between anticipatory pain and real pain, okay? Or between deceit and veracity. Though unfortunately, this deception detection is a little bit harder problem than Pinocchio. So, okay, that's why we started analyzing the temporal evolution of facial actions in face videos. One of the first approaches that we proposed was to analyze temporal segments of action units in profile view phase videos. So we tracked a number of points in the phase profile video, and then we defined a set of rules which would say, in case a certain point or a certain 2 points have a specific displacement, then you will score an onset or an apex or an offset of an action unit. And we had rules on a higher level which would say, okay, if you scored onset, onset, offset, it's impossible, okay? So you must have an apex frame in between, okay? Especially if you would have onset, onset, offset, apex, right? So this offset label will be just turned into an apex label, okay? Then this was a frame by frame basis. Then, of course, we tried to do this a little bit smarter and with a little bit more advanced techniques. So we first trained a number of support vector machines classifiers, which are statistical machine learning methods, which will give you on a frame-by-frame basis whether an action unit is an onset or apex or offset, and then we would put that into the hidden Markov models, which would then temporally smooth the results of support vector machine classifiers. We also worked on a rather unorthodox method, which is the method for using dynamic texture for analysis of facial actions. So in this approach, what we wanted to do is to recognize action units and their temporal evolution based on non-rigid registration. So facial motion has two different kinds of motions. You can divide it into two different kinds. One is the rigid motion, which accounts for your head movements, and non-rigid motion, which accounts for your facial expression. So while the rigid registration will cancel the effects of the head movements, the non-rigid registration should cancel the effect of the facial expression. The inverse process of that will actually give you what was the motion which accounts for the expression. So what you see here is the original video and then a grid laid over that video. The deformation of the grid that you see is calculated on a frame-by-frame basis based on the motion observed in the input video. What you see here is the summed up motion for the whole video. And you clearly see this is what you will apply to to do the non-rigid registration, so to cancel the effect of facial expression, and it actually exactly defines you the expression. In fact, if you apply this deformation on a neutral frame, you will get, now it will take some time, this kind of expression. Of course, you don't have the teeth because in the first frame you don't see the teeth, so you will not be able to model that. So what we use as the features are the motion magnitude, the curl, the divergence, and we put that into the gentle boost classifiers for the recognition of the onset and the offset of each of the target action unit. You cannot do the apex because during the apex there is no motion. So you have just the facial expression in the apex. So you actually model the onset and offset, and then in the hidden Markov model part of the method, you actually say I should be first in onset, then it should come this apex, which I didn't score, but I know it should be there, and it should be more than one frame, one at least, and then you have the offset phase. So as you can see, although again, the onset and offset are maybe noisy a little bit, the detection on a frame-by-frame basis. Once you use the full temporal model, you actually smooth temporally the results. And very recently, we start working on something completely else, which is the analysis of facial dynamic behavior in terms of affective dimensions. So the whole idea behind this is to map the observed behavior onto a multidimensional continuous interpretation space. Okay? So usually we use two dimensions. One is the valence and says something about how positive an expression is or a behavior is. So for example, happiness would be a very positive expression, right, behavior, while anger would be negative one. So would be disgust and fear, right? While arousal dimension can be high and low and says something about how the person was excited while expressing that behavior. So for example, in case of happiness, usually this goes with high excitement, while the sadness goes with low excitement. So you know maybe, okay, what is she talking about? Pure psychology. The whole idea behind this is that you could map any behavior on multidimensional continuous interpretation space, okay? Why? Because the behavior is continuous. Phenomena is continuous. However, if you use this kind of discrete categories, you artificially categorize and divide the behavior in discrete subspaces, which is not logical, okay? Another thing is, two dimensions as such may not be enough to interpret each and every behavior, but you can use additional dimensions such as, which are standard, such as energy and anticipation and intensity, or each of the target behaviors could be a dimension on its own right. So for example, currently we are interested in agreement and disagreement, which are the social attitudes, and we model each of those as a separate dimension. Okay? The whole idea is that you want multidimensional, continuous interpretation space. The method that we developed very recently and we are very proud of is the method that proposes a new regression method, which is output associative relevance vector machine regression, and it interprets the input phase in terms of valence and arousal in continuous space using just classically tracked points, right? However, you use this information not only on a frame basis, but you use the temporal information around that frame, and you take the temporal information around the current frame into account. Impressive about this method is that even if you test, when we tested this method, we trained it on a single subject, and we tested on multiple subjects, unknown subjects, the results were actually very, very good, very accurate. So, I have told you now what we have done in the last 15 years. This is just a small subset of the things on which we worked, and some of these things can be considered solved, such as, for example, automatic analysis of facial expressions in static face images, at least when it comes to interpretation in discrete categories, such as the prototypic facial expressions of 6 basic emotions. We extensively worked on face and facial point tracking, and although this is not still solved, as I said, we are coming closer. This is the result of active appearance model-based tracker for this image of this girl that is moving really a lot and really fast. However, this tracker cannot handle this kind of variations in lighting, so we are currently looking into combining the two. However, we also work on a number of things which we just started. So we first of all started working on the behavior interpretation in terms of multidimensional continuous interpretation spaces. We also start working on using facial expressions as the means for identifying people. So instead of using classically the texture of the face as the biometric trait, we are using facial motion as the behaviometric trait, okay? We also started working on facial expression analysis from three-dimensional videos. This is very interesting because finally in three-dimensional videos you can observe the changes in the depth of the facial surface, and you can finally see certain actions that we were not able to see before, like for example clenches of the jaw or the tremor under the eye, which are extremely important when you want to judge the stress, the frustration, or the deception. And we started working on something else, which is how we can interpret the interplay between people in human-human naturalistic interactions. This is very interesting because only if you have this kind of work, you will be able to detect things like mimicry or chameleon effect, which are of extreme importance when you want to analyze the negotiation, how well the negotiation, for example, goes, or the deception. Mimicry is one of the cues for deception. What did I learn? So the first thing that I learned is that we should work with naturalistic rather than with acted behavior. The point is that acted behaviors are short-lived and extremely exaggerated. Naturalistic behaviors are very subtle. If you train your methods on acted behavior examples, you will not be able to deal with subtlety of naturalistic behavior. The second thing is the dynamics of the behavior in terms of how long an action lasts, how long the onset of the action or the offset of the action lasts, how frequent is certain action, and who displays what, when, okay? This is extremely important if you want to deal with complex behaviors like pain, like deception, like social emotions as well, empathy, for example. The third one is, as I already said, I believe that multidimensional continuous interpretation of behavior is the way forward. And the main reason is that the behavior itself is continuous. So artificially placing it into discrete categories just simply doesn't make sense. And finally, I have learned that without very good people, there are no good results. I am grateful to my collaborators, but most of all, I'm grateful to my group, the IBAC group. In fact, none of this work that I showed tonight would be possible without them. So all this recognition, even this award, actually belongs to them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, that like me, you thoroughly enjoyed that, and no doubt you have some questions for Professor Pontic. I'd now like to open the lecture to general discussion and to invite questions from the floor. We have roving microphones, so please raise your hand, wait for the microphone to get to you, because we would like to record this, and then state your name and organisation in framing your question, please.
Hello, Adrian Beasley, Kroll House Associates. How successful, there's a lot of features that you're analysing there. How successfully do you find can people completely mask their emotions? I'm thinking of poker players, for example.
Well, it depends. Okay, so first, how well they can mask it. I believe some can do it very, very well. Some people are exactly poker players. I think the more important question is whether I'm interested in poker players when doing this research. I think that I'm more interested in people sitting in front of a computer and getting really frustrated because exactly, you know, this small thing which was paperclip in Windows appears all the time whenever you don't want to see it, right? So, and then it's usually when you want to present, you don't know how to put it off and so on. So these kind of reactions I'm interested in. People are, even though they're really under stress, you know, they try to mask the things, but you know, you really get frustrated, and this is the thing that I'm interested in. Another thing is also human-human interaction, you know. It is very important to understand that people are social beings. So we are all extremely interested that other party likes us. In order that we are liked, we try to mimic other people. If somebody is very expressive, like myself, usually people who are talking with me start, you know, doing all possible gestures as well. I don't know if this answers the question. I hope so.
Microphone.
Good evening, and I would like to say thank you very much for coming and giving this presentation. My name is Nuno Vinas, and I work as a lecturer on a college here in London. But my question to you tonight is about the experience that you have had throughout the research. Does it actually lead into any further work into the medical scientific way of interpretation?
Medical applications are very, very important in this field. So, for example, we are currently working on pain analysis. This is the joint work with the University College London. I think my collaborators in that project are present here. And the whole idea is that we want to analyze exactly this difference between the anticipatory pain and the real pain. And because, look, what's the point is that when you know, when you are hurt, so for example, we are working on the lower back pain, and you have to practice, you have to do your exercises in order to make yourself better, right? But you're very much afraid of that pain. So you have this anticipatory pain that you will show, plus the fear. This is exactly where this methodology comes in, where we can recognize that somebody is fearful, and we should give actually the feedback of how this should be performed, of whether this will hurt, which moment will hurt, and so on. So this is one of the direct applications on which we work currently. However, there are many, many more applications. One of the applications I'm personally interested in is the depression and how the drugs work on people that are depressed. Usually those people sit at home, they're depressed, they take their pills, and we have no idea whether the pill is working or not. This kind of methodology could be used to monitor those people in a kind of conversation that they could have with their own family, or with a friend, or even with a virtual avatar, and then judge actually based on the speed and the activation of the facial expressions how well or how much is that person depressed, because there are very typical signs of depression, like looking downwards, being actually very slow, and so on. So if the medicine is working, these signs will be less and less. This is something that Carnegie Mellon University is currently working on, and I am there as a kind of advisor. So, but this is just really at the beginning. So these are the two fields or applications on which we work, and I guess we can imagine quite some in addition.
Elizabeth Sparrow.
Elizabeth Sparrow, I'm immediate past president at BCS. Thank you very much. Fantastic lecture. I'd like to ask a question about whether you've explored to what extent expression is learnt. And I guess one of the clearest examples I could think of is, have you tried out these tests with blind people? who have never seen, do they have the same facial expressions? Can you use the same techniques for them? Or, you know, to what extent do we learn from each other to express these things?
So this is a classical question that you pose to a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a computer scientist. What I work on is automatic analysis of facial expressions. How we express those facial expressions, I have to know because I have to build my methods based on that. But I cannot answer your questions with certainty. I just can tell you what psychologists say about it. So what they say is that many of the facial expressions are hardwired. So even completely blind and deaf people can laugh and know how to laugh with smile and the sound, which is ha ha ha, right? So this is one of the proofs that certain expressions are hardwired. 6 basic emotions, prototypic facial expressions of 6 basic emotions, are some of those expressions. Whether everybody will show it exactly in that way, this I can say some of the psychologists claim, I don't believe, but I know that certain elements of those expressions are definitely there, because this is shown again by quite a number of psychologists that, for example, in surprise, we do tend to raise the eyebrows, right? Whether we will have the full expression of surprise does not matter, but certain elements of those expressions are always there. So, as I said, this is just what I have read. This is not my research.
There's a question from Andrew Blake in the front row. Coming from behind you, Andrew.
Rather, as I suspected would happen, that was a really wonderful lecture, and I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed it. Autism is about partly the inability to express emotion. I wonder if your work could help somehow to help autistic children express emotion.
Thank you very much for this question. This is actually one of the continuation of the discussion about the medical applications. So indeed, I can say probably a person who is for the longest time with my group, Michel Falstad, is currently not here. He's at MIT. And he's working with Rosalind Picard on different smiles shown by autistic people, by autistic children, in fact. It seems that autistic children show the smiles in a different way and definitely understand it in a different way. It seems that depending on the specter of the autism, some children are actually afraid when people are smiling. The reason is that something in their brain is differently wired than in our brain, and they actually have this original meaning of the smile, which is baring of the teeth, which means danger. Right? So they have to learn that smiles are actually something which is pleasant and they should be happy about. And they show a very wide range of different smiles. And we are currently working on automatic analysis of those.
Pick one. Yes.
Charles Ross, the Brain Mind Forum. We're doing quite a lot of work on the neurological effects of people making decisions. Have you done any work on facial changes as people make decisions?
No. But this is an excellent idea. I think we should work on that. No, we didn't do it. So the first database that we have is actually, you didn't put it, okay. Is actually done with Anton Eichholt from University of Twente. And in this database, we recorded fully synchronously people talking about different things, different topics. There is that's not hard decision making, but it's in principle how one should persuade the other to give him or her a room, so that they share a room in a flat. And so he or she should be very smart in how to answer all the questions and what that person really wants to hear and so on. So we could analyze actually that kind of interactions between people, but we didn't still do it. So,
Charles, I'm sure that could be solved by a suitably large research grant.
it's an excellent idea, yeah.
There's some towards... Okay, go ahead. Then we'll work towards the back, otherwise we're favouring the... Thank you. Thanks. One.
Sorry. Ian MacDonald, BAE Systems Detica. Have you done any validation work with maybe film that's been obtained from the police forces in looking at deception? And the second part of the question, if I can, is under looking specifically at deception, at what kind of picture resolution does your continual process start to break down?
So it's as follows. No, we didn't analyze any real-world images. We did try to do so. We didn't get the permission to get those videos. We have yesterday submitted a grant proposal for the deception detection. And we have on board both Home Office and US borders. They both promised to give us this data. However, what we want to do is a three-dimensional analysis. The reason we want to do so is that if you have two-dimensional videos, you have usually 30 frames per second. Sure, you can go to 60, you can go to 100, and then you can catch certain things. Very important things are micro-expressions. Those are very brief changes in the face, and they last something like 1/10 or even less of a second, okay? So in principle, in a regular video, like TV video, you would not catch micro-expressions, okay? So you have higher temporal resolution that you need. But when it comes to the spatial resolution, we want 3D because of these changes, like tremor, like the jaw clench, which we cannot see. Jaw clench you cannot see in frontal view. You don't see whether somebody is clenching his or her jaw. Right? And these are exactly the indications of deception. So when we have it for 3D, we hope we will be able to distill the most prominent features and then try it in 2D. But I believe that we will not be able to use regular videos of only 30 frames per second.
Can we take some of the questions from at the back, please? Just so we spread this around the audience a little.
Hello, Colin De Silva, Thomson Reuters. I have two questions. One is more of an engineering question, and that is, the first one is, what kind of computing power do you need to do this in real time? Are we going to see this on mobile phones, for example, enhancing Siri, for example? And the second question is cultural. Do you have to have a different algorithm for different cultures?
Okay, both questions are very good. No, we do not have anything which would, at this point, be able to run on a mobile phone. The main reason for that is the spatial resolution of the cameras built in the mobile phones. We do need higher spatial resolution. So, for example, to detect the face, you will need something like 400 by 400 pixels at least. But if you talk about facial expressions, you need actually probably higher spatial resolution. Not for all expressions, but not for happiness, not for smiles, not for surprise and these kind of things. But yes, if you want some subtle things, right? Especially things which are changes in the depth of the facial texture, like inward pull of the mouth corners, which is typical of exasperation, which is again very when you talk on the phone, okay, when this will finish, and you have this facial expression, and there is no chance that we will catch this up. Real time, even currently, So I think Andrew from Anthropics is here, and they're trying to. We just they were just interested in our facial point detection, and they got it, and they want to make it real time, and I think they will be able to make it real time. And this is something which really needs engineering work, and we don't do that. So we do work only with MATLAB, or certain portions we put in C++, but in principle we are interested into ideas and algorithms, and still not in this engineering bits. Maybe that's wrong, but that's at this point how it is, right? About the cultures, definitely. I mean, all the cultures have very specific expressions that are typical for them. As I said, the Greeks say no in this way, right? So when you first meet a Greek, it happened to me actually, really. I entered the elevator and I said, do you go down? And you go up, what? At this point, it was up, but it was by chance, okay? Because he didn't mean to show me that he goes up. He said, I don't go down, right? So it was, this is difficult, you know? So you really need to know this kind of signals if you want to interpret correctly the behavior. So yes, I believe that you need to have a very good way of modeling different cultural differences in cultures.
Someone should really have told the European Central Bank. One in the middle here, please. Gentleman in the middle with his hand raised. Yeah, keep there. Positive. Thank you.
Just a simple question. How applicable is your work to criminal behavior investigations?
So this is, so what is a criminal behavior investigation? If we talk about indication of deception, yes, it's applicable. If we are talking about concealment of intent, yes, you can apply it and try to find, you know, where is the stress. But don't think I will build a lie detector. I don't believe that, I mean, even the polygraph has a success rate of below 80%, okay? So how can you do it based only on facial expressions? Some people are simply more expressive and some are less expressive, and some people are more nervous and some are less nervous, you know? So I don't believe that we will be able to really build this kind of technology, but what we will be able to do is to indicate to a human observer, well, there is a piece in your conversation where this person was more nervous or could maybe conceal something. Maybe you should ask more about that part, right? So, but you know, like if you again talk about surveillance, yes, we can do tracking of the faces and tracking of people, you know, so it really depends what you mean by counterterrorism.
Hi. Question in the middle on this side, on the keep coming.
Nigel Crook from Oxford Brookes University. You seem to have progressed towards a dynamical systems perspective of facial recognition, where you're monitoring movements in time of various parts together. Do you see heading even further in that direction and using the tools of dynamical systems in analyzing facial expressions and comparing them one against the other?
Can you, because, okay, what's exactly the question?
You've gone from static analysis of images to temporal signals of several points around the face, which could then be looked at from a dynamical systems perspective. So you could draw phase plots of how these points change relative to each other, and then you can compare one facial expression to another and how it changes dynamically within that phase plot. And is that something that you think would be useful?
This is very interesting, yes. Actually, there is, we didn't do it, but there is a work on Rensselaer Institute, which is in the States, and they actually build dynamic Bayesian networks to represent, how to say, the interplay of different facial actions, atomic facial actions, those action units, in certain expressions, and they could prove actually what is this interplay and which comes after which. So we still didn't do that in that way, and this is definitely something which we need to address, because, as I said, the interplay between different cues, being that the points or the action units or any other gestures like nods or hand gestures, you are very interested in the interplay between those. When is which appearing, how fast, right? And how long it takes, because this gives you the actual interpretation of the behavior. So we are looking currently into the ways of doing that. Dynamic Bayesian networks, if that says anything to you, is an answer to this.
The question in the center there, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Samanis, I work at Covesta. During your lecture, one of the thoughts that popped into my head was, what if I were to give you a composite or an artificial image? Say, for example, from the nose up, the image is showing someone who's showing anger, but from the nose down, it's showing someone who is very surprised. So how would you classify that? Is there like a dominant expression amongst that?
And this is the reason why I moved away from the prototypic expressions of basic emotions. This is why I worked with action units, because action units are agnostic, they are independent of this kind of interpretations. So this kind of expression may be, you know, a negative surprise, an unpleasant surprise as an interpretation, right? But I would leave that interpretation to some higher level methods, and I would just do my action units. However, if I'm interested exactly in my unpleasant surprise, right, then I will model it as different examples of that expression. So, I mean, to answer directly, I will simply not classify it as anger and surprise at this point. Now, you could do that, but this is not what I would do. I don't know if that... This is also the reason why we moved, for example, to affective dimensions, because this kind of expression would be negative in terms of valence and having high arousal, because surprise usually goes with high arousal, so for example.
I think I saw one more question on the right-hand side. Yes, you want to hold your hand up, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I think you can sit here. Name is Mr. Martin. I'm retired in the British Computer Society. It was an extremely fascinating lecture, and it's far better than the last one I heard, by the way. What occurred to me was this, that you say, all right, we have about 7,000 sort of image things we do with our expressions every day, and about 10,000 in all. To remember, we also have about 1,000 words which are the basic knowledge that we require to speak the English language, probably 10,000 for a very good language. So in effect, we've got two separate languages, which is something I've learned this evening, actually. Now, the interesting point is that a long time ago, when we were all primates, we only had one language, namely expressions, and then gradually we then evolved language. And the point occurs to me, have we sort of inherited from, say, chimpanzees or something like that, common sort of expressions which are now common in human beings as well? I mean, is it sort of 100% inheritance or 0, or what percentage?
I don't know. But Charles Darwin was claiming that at least the 6 basic prototypic facial expressions of happiness, surprise, anger, disgust, fear are the same in chimpanzees and humans. So that's something. But there is a lot of research in psychology on the primates and on the facial expressions in primates. So I really did not read that literature, so I cannot tell you the findings, but I just know that there are commonalities.
I think there's an interesting point there, that animals who are very close to us are actually better at interpreting facial expression. So dogs, for example, are much better than chimpanzees at interpreting human facial expression. Any more questions? One final question. Okay. Yes, we're still going strong.
Hi, thank you very much. Mark Harrison, independent consultant. You talked about your ability to distinguish between naturalistic and acted expressions. Are professional actors actually more naturalistic than you or I would be if asked to emote surprise?
There is a psychologist called Klaus Scherer, whom I really, really respect and love, and he thinks so. But I disagree. I think that actually the naturalistic expressions that we show are the ones, at least, I'm really interested in. And the actors may show them in a certain way, but it's always a little bit of exaggeration there, because they are this is a simply, you know, professional deformation for them. They need to express certain emotions, and in order to do that, they tend to exaggerate. So although they can express it quite naturally, there is always a small, you know, level of exaggeration. At least this is my belief. Klaus would not agree with me. So, but he's, you know, an authority, and I'm not on that field. So
I saw at least one more hand up. There's a gentleman in red here in the centre.
Hi. Robert Miles, University of Nottingham. An application which occurred to me was a lot of computers these days have webcams built in. And I thought a lot of employers might be interested in the attitudes and emotions expressed by their employees at work. If you're laughing too much whilst working, perhaps you're not working, for example. And it seemed to me that this is kind of creepy and horrifying. So my question is, what are your thoughts on the possible ethical implications of the technologies that this research might facilitate?
Okay, I see it coming. You know, I was just waiting when this will come. Big Brother is watching you. So, yes, I would love to have such a technology, put it in the computers of all my students, and I know exactly what they do. I don't have that technology. So, and I think that the point is that we really need to be careful about this, right? So whenever we do a project, we have to get ethical clearance. So we really need to explain what we will do with the data, how, in case, for example, if you want to stress somebody, that person must be able to leave if the person doesn't feel well about that. So there is a lot of procedures, ethical procedures, that we follow anyhow because we work with human subjects, okay? So, but however, still, I would love to have this technology, at least for my group, and I will not give it to the other people.
Hi, Kostas Konstantinidis from AFS UK. Thank you very much for your talk today. I heard a few ideas about applications, but I think my question is how you envisage yourself taking the results of your research forward. How would you like this research being applied in the future?
So, one of the main things what I would really like to do is to help people understand themselves better. So what's the point is that you have a lot of people who struggle in their social interactions, and they have no clue why do they have this problem, okay? So I think that it would be great if we would have something that could monitor ourselves and the other person and give you prompts. Okay, don't frown. Don't ask that. Stop talking, okay? Because, okay, this stop talking is me, right? So, because I talk just too much. So, in principle, I think this would be my, one of the goals. I don't know whether we can achieve it, how fast we can achieve it. I mean, this is not very far away. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, I don't know. But this is one thing which I would be really interested in because I believe it could help a lot of people.
One, definitely the last question from the lady in the front here. Thank you.
Sofia Drosopoulou at Imperial College. Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. I have got two questions, but related. The first is, have you got an explanation why the scientists are not that good at identifying who is faking? And then there is a related question that apparently the interpretation of the facial expression is somehow subjective. So what are you training your system to do? To interpret them in the way that 5 judges interpret the expressions, or how do you need to calibrate how you are classifying the expressions that you are observing?
Okay, so about the first, I have no comments. So why the technical people cannot interpret spontaneous versus acted, I don't know. I leave it to you to think about it. But the second, what we do is the following. It is true. So, okay, first of all, for example, Paul Ekman will disagree with you. According to him, according to Charles Darwin, according to many psychologists, there are at least those 6 basic emotions that are expressed and interpreted by everybody in this world in the very same way. However, I disagree with you, so what we do is the following. We ask the people to annotate. That's why we moved, for example, to those dimensions, okay? Because if you give them any possibility to annotate in any possible way with any possible word, it's very difficult because people will use different words while maybe meaning something similar, right? So it is therefore quite useful if you would have these dimensions, because they could simply show you how positive this is, how excited this is, how intensive this is, and so on and so forth, okay? If you're interested, again, agreement, disagreement, it would be the same. Still, they have a big differences, okay, huge differences in their interpretations. So what we do, we try to add as many observers as that the inter-observer reliability is high enough. We are talking about approximately 75 to 80%. And very often we need something like between 15 and 30 observers in order to reach that. That is used as a ground truth. And we are currently working on different methods that actually try to merge the annotations done by different annotators in a meaningful way. So that's another thing what we are working on. All right.
I can't resist rising to the part of that last question. I can't answer it for you, but let me share with you a little story. And it comes from someone that should remain nameless, but let's call them Danny Finkelstein for the sake of argument. And he once showed me a letter from a headmaster commending a student to his computer science department. And it said something like, "This student has absolutely 0 interpersonal skills. He is completely uncomfortable with dealing with human beings, only comfortable with machines. Ideal computer science student." No. Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen 2 tours de force this evening. First, the tour de force of Maya Panic's lecture, which I thought was beautifully delivered and beautifully illustrated too. And secondly, the tour de force of answering quite so many questions, quite so capably and quite so honestly. So I would very much like to thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to invite Tom McEwen from Edinburgh Napier University and chair of the BCS Chartered Institute for IT Interaction Specialist Group to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jim, very much for inviting me. And we were all watching your micro expressions there for the last 10 minutes. It's been very entertaining. Before I thank Maya, our excellent speaker, there are a number of other people that we should thank. And first of all, we should thank everybody here at the Royal Society for making it such an effortless big occasion. It's been a tremendous evening, I think you'll agree. So thank you to the Royal Society. We should also thank Anne Blanford and Daniel Greenfield for their part in the proceedings. And we should especially thank Andrew Blake and Microsoft Research. Microsoft Research are a great supporter of human-computer interaction. They've been involved in supporting the conference of my specialist group, HCI 2012, next year, September in Birmingham. And we've run a number of conferences with their help, and indeed they co-hosted 2009 in Cambridge. I also thank Andrew for raising that question about the potential usefulness on the autistic spectrum. That was actually a line that I was thinking about going down, but there goes 2 minutes out of my vote of thanks. And we should also thank all of the staff at BCS for arranging tonight, and in particular Anika and Linda, who were both very patient as my face tried not to show its exasperation on the Piccadilly line as we trundled very slowly in from Heathrow. So on to our speaker, a tremendous lecture, a tremendous performance, a bravura performance in handling so many questions from so many different directions. But there were a couple of things that ran through my mind as I was watching this. We've been involved with a company that makes ATMs in trying to increase the social acceptability of biometrics at the ATM. It's a great way of authenticating. But there are some acceptability problems. But suddenly, and I'm now reminded of my 14-year-old who comes up to me, and a smile grows slowly across her face, and I know she's about to ask me for money. How great it would be. We would love our cash machines if we walked up to them. And it would maybe give you enough for the night out. It would maybe even predict how well your night out is going to be. Another big area of interest for the interaction group is the whole area of user experience. We work quite closely with people in industry on trying to define standards of competency in what is a very new field, and one which possibly has more than an element of the wild frontier about it at this point in time. But through the skills framework for the information age, we're defining skills in there to try and codify what is needed to create a good user experience. Now, there's several obvious applications of this research into the field of emotion, of user experience. Already the industry attempts to use emotion tracking. But what tends to happen is they can measure arousal, but they can't actually measure positive or negative. And we obviously saw this evening ways of placing things on that scale. And then secondly, the big thing that's missing from the whole user experience research field is that it's still very much pleasing the individual, and it doesn't have any kind of social responsibility. And obviously the whole field of social signal processing encourages us to look at how people interplay with each other and with the technology. So these are two things which occurred to me in watching this. I'm really stirred up by tonight's lecture, and indeed by having read up on a few papers beforehand. I surely hope that you will come, and all of your team come, to HDI 2012 in Birmingham next September. Because we really want to try, in the BCS, to bring together people not just within the silo, but from across the fields and the different subfields. But I'd like to conclude by thanking Maya very much. I'm sure Fry's Chocolate Company, if they ever want to relaunch the Fry's Five Boys chocolate bar, some of you remember it, the rest of you are too young. But I think Maya's 6 girls, the 6 different facial expressions on a chocolate bar, that's bound to be a success. So, thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you very much, Tom. It falls to me to close this evening, but before we do, I'd like to just draw attention to one very special lady who is with us tonight, and it's an honour to have you here, and it's Professor Maya Pantic's mother. And I think we should congratulate you on the achievements of Robert. So, in closing, I will give yet another commercial, and that is to remind those here about the BCS IET Turing Lecture Series 2012 because I think it links quite well to what we've been discussing tonight. And the title is From Cryptanalysis to Cognitive Neuroscience, A Hidden Legacy of Alan Turing. And many here will know that next year, 2012, is the Turing Centenary. And the person giving those lectures is Professor Ray Dolan, who is the Mary Kinross Professor of Neuropsychiatry and Director of the Wellcome Trust Centre for Neuroimaging at University College London. And as ever, there'll be 4 runs of that lecture. On the 21st of February at Savoy Place, 23rd of February at University of Cardiff, 28th of February at University of Manchester, and finally the 29th of February at University of Edinburgh. They're all engraved on my soul because I'm giving the vote of thanks on all 4 occasions, so I should know it by the end of that. So, finally, thank you to everyone for coming this evening. It's been wonderful to see such a great turnout. I think it's a tribute to our speaker, and I would like to invite those of you joining us this evening, I'm told in my script there, who have paid for the buffet, to come and join us at the reception. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.